start with prioritizing self-care in your life. This is a big part in what the decisions you made and the routes that you've taken. So talk to me about your journey with that.
Yeah, I think it changes as we age, doesn't it? As things in our life change. So, I mean, I did some of those normal things in the first years. I did exercise and I did dietary things and all that kind of thing, not realizing how much of my emotional past was really affecting me. So it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I realized that my past was affecting me, and I started to look into it. And that was very different self-care, right? That was self-care on more of an inner level than the external exercise and such. So over the last 20 years or so, it's all been inner work, inner self-care, which has been involved taking the time to do that inner work. That's what most of the self-care has been about.
Yeah, it's taking the time. Yeah, you got to sit with it. You got to be willing to work through it. And so when was that? So you said your late 30s, which good for you. I didn't really hit this point till 50. So congratulations. You got there earlier than I did, which is so much better. The sooner the better. But also it's never too late to take this journey. Talk to me about confidently setting boundaries. Did that become a part of this realization of this isn't working? This isn't addressing things. So within that, talk to me about your boundaries journey and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, the word boundary is so interesting.
Yeah. Well, it depends on how you approach it. It can be very inhibiting or it can be very freeing depending on the approach you take to it.
Right. And again, it changes as we change. So early on, we think we need to set these boundaries, and those boundaries are kind of almost energetic stops. It's like, okay, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to do that. And over time, I realized that it was an energetic stop. It was actually, as my journey went on, I realized that we use words and we use stories a lot to begin with when we don't have a lot of self-awareness. But as I opened up my subconscious mind and things started to release, I realized that I could become aware of the physical sensations underneath the emotions. So if we're feeling frustrated, what we're actually describing is where we're holding tension in our body, but then we describe as frustration. So when I became aware of that, for me, frustration is tension across the solar plexus area, like in the stomach area. That's also kind of where we can feel a boundary. It's like a stop. I'm not going to do that. And when we do that, we hold tension for me, in my rib cage, in my chest, in my stomach area. And that tension is dis-ease in the body. Right? It's not at ease. It's not relaxed. It's actually tension. So I would start to notice that tension and release it. So now where I am now, I will notice if I'm putting up a boundary, right? It's almost like a trigger. If something triggers me, there's an emotion, but there's also tension. So I will find that tension. I will hold my awareness on it and allow the tension to dissolve. Okay. So it's kind of a very different way of looking at boundaries than I had earlier on.
Okay. And where was that shift? So when it comes to relationships and how you use your time, how does that play into it?
Well, a lot of this journey started because of relationships. Part of my story is when I was 9, we lived in Hong Kong, and I was sent to a boys' boarding school, so my brother's boarding school in England, which is a very long way away from your family. Yeah. And I was the only girl boarder there for the first year. So I was teased mercilessly by those boys in the age of 9 through 13. It was not a good time of my life. And I had 2 boys. I have 2 boys. And my boys were getting up in age. They were getting close to that age. And I knew I had to do something about my fear of boys, age 9 through 13, before my boys got to that age. So that was kind of part of the impetus to start doing this inner work. Because I was afraid of them. I was afraid of boys. So I had to do that work. I had to notice that fear and actually go back through all the memories I had of those years at that school and release them so that I was more at peace with people that age. And when I was more at peace with people that age, children that age, then the household was more at peace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That makes so much sense. Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So how about from a time standpoint? You've got this work that you do and it's powerful. How do you decide how to spend your time? What kind of helps you with that?
Yeah. Well, again, that's changed over this last 20 years or so. To begin with, I was so determined to change. So part of the first thing that I did really was to start noticing when I was emotional during the day. Because unless you can do that, unless you can stand back and say, okay, look at me, I'm starting to get frustrated, rather than actually getting frustrated and getting caught up in the emotion, right?
Sure.
You'll just stand back and say, okay, this is happening. Until you can do that, you can't do anything about it. So that was the very first part of the journey. And I could do that throughout the day, right? It became easier. The first day, maybe I only noticed once. But as time went by, I would notice it more and more often. So I could just do that during the day. And the technique I used to begin with was called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping because we're tapping on our body as we're working through things. So I could do that during the day. I could pop to the bathroom if I needed to tap to bring myself back to peace. And then I could carry on with my day. So that was kind of easy. But I noticed things changing and I wanted it to go faster. I wanted more change and I wanted faster change. So at that point, I had to set myself time. So I would do it in the evenings. I actually wrote down all my childhood traumas, everything I could think of, all my big traumas, little traumas, all the humiliations, all the embarrassments, all the teasing that happened, all of those things, I wrote them down. And I would go into another room, actually my closet, the master bedroom closet.
Yeah, I had one of those too. It can be very useful.
Yeah. And I would tap through one of those events each night. And it might take up to an hour to an hour and a half. I would tap through the whole event over and over again with the same event until all the emotion around it had gone.
Wow.
So I would do that every night. My husband would look after the boys. I would go and do that tapping.
Wow.
But over time, actually, once my subconscious mind had opened up more, so that's what happens. With the tapping releases those big layers, the emotional layers. And as those release, the layers that are underneath start to open up. So, which is the subconscious mind opening up. And as that happens, our self-awareness deepens. So that's when I became aware of those physical sensations underneath the emotions. Yeah. And at that point, I'd gone through my whole childhood. So I would lay on the sofa in the evening. So my boys would be there doing things on their computer, whatever. I would lay on the sofa and I would bring collective traumas to mind because I'd done my childhood.
Sure.
So collective traumas might be something like 9/11, right? We all experienced our own personal experience of that collective trauma.
Sure.
So I bring those to mind and just allow the energy or the emotions that had been stuck to release.
Yeah.
So I would do that on the sofa. I was right there. Mentally, I was right there. If they needed anything, if they asked a question or anything, I was right there and I can answer. But I would spend that time to do that work.
Wow.
Now, as time has gone on, and I've actually developed the ability to sense inside my body itself, rather than lay on the sofa, I can now do this anywhere, anytime. I'll do it while I'm watching TV, while I'm doing the dishes, while I'm walking. So I still spend a lot of time throughout the day doing this inner work, but it's not as focused time as it used to be in those early days.
Okay. All right. And don't worry, if these resources and how EFT works, I'm familiar with EFT. I've used some tapping in my therapy over the years. So I'm pretty, but if you're not familiar with that, again, these resources are going to be available to you to get into that more and explain that because it is a very powerful tool. And I love how you explained, you were able to identify these things, which goes, you've already really spoken to this, but taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health, you were able to identify, okay, when these emotions are coming up, this is where I feel it in my body. I know that, like, when I feel anxiety rising up to me, it shows up right here. My chest tightens up, everything kind of freezes, everything kind of seizes up, like tightens up. And I'm like, okay, what is promoting this? Where's the root of this? Where's this coming from? And so talk to me. So at what point, you talked about, you knew you had to make the shift when the boys were getting close to that age that you knew was going to be triggering for you. Did you always feel it in your body up to this point, or was it through this practice that unfolded piece? Just kind of go into that.
Yeah, I did not have self-awareness when I started this journey at all. I had so many barriers inside of me. I was so tense. I was so highly strung. I was very reactive. So yeah, I had no self-awareness. If someone asked me during the day, how are you feeling, Anne? I would always say I'm fine, because I did not know how I felt on the inside. So it's very much an unlayering process, like layer by layer by layer by layer by layer. And it's just a deepening of that self-awareness. Yeah. So yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people don't realize that that connection is there. We think about emotions in terms of words, I'm feeling sad or whatever, but we don't realize there is a physical component to it. And it's absolutely connected. It's one and the same. So even when we're working with EFT, even when I was working with EFT at the beginning, doing this tapping on my memories, so I was just using words and stories, it was still affecting me at a physical level. I just was not aware of it at that point.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I understand. When I went, so for me, some EFT, I used EMDR was something that was really helpful for me. But you don't even know until you get into it. And you said something so important earlier: as you peel back another layer gets exposed and lets you know that it's time to pay attention to that. And for me, it was so much about retraining my subconscious and my nervous system that I was safe now, that this was in a safe space. And as my system felt safe, another thing would be revealed and allow me to work through it. And I also realized that a lot of the physical things, I went through bouts of high blood pressure and racing heartbeat. I'd have anxiety attacks when all these things will kind of come into a head, that my body was kind of screaming at me, pay attention to this. And so many times we look at our bodies and emotions as negatives, and they're clues. They're clues if we're willing to get into it and do the work and explore. Would you say that has been your experience? Or how did you even find the EFT? That's the other thing too. Talk about that.
Okay. Absolutely. That's been my experience. Yes. But the way I found the technique is it wasn't so much my son's, growing up. That was just part of the reason I did this work. But it was actually what I call a business altercation with a couple of other mothers at my boys' school. And these mothers were self-confident, self-assured, authority type women. And I was a scared mother on the inside, and they told me I'd done something wrong. My mind just spun out of control. I just could not stop it spinning over and over what they'd said, what I said, what I did, what I could have done differently, just all those different permutations. For 3 days, I couldn't sleep. It was just so intense. Yeah. And that's what I realized at the end. Okay, this is not normal.
Right. What is this connected to? This has got a deeper story.
Right. But I also realized at that point, it felt a little bit like how I would react when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong. So that was the first little inkling. Okay, maybe it's something from my childhood. Yeah. So it was in that time frame I actually went to a doctor's appointment. And I can't remember why I went to him, but it was nothing to do with emotions or my past or anything. Right. But he was a holistic physician. So he had more tools in his toolbox than many other doctors do. Yes. And he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was. And I said 8. And then he asked me why. And it was that question that made me realize, okay, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19. So that hadn't been in my mind until he asked the question. And then I realized the tears from that event were so close to the surface. They were my surface layers. So he tapped with me. He knew the technique. He knew EFT. He tapped with me for about 15 minutes.
Wow.
And I walked away from that appointment realizing for the first time ever that we hold those memories and those emotions physically in our body and that we can let them go. That was the first time that had ever happened. And that was really the start of the journey.
Well, and it's so empowering when you realize that's possible. I mean, I think that you get to where I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have to carry all this. I don't have to, I can release this. I can move through it. I can feel lighter because there's a heaviness that goes with that. At least there was for me. Did you notice just that sense of lighter and kind of unloading a burden as you were working through this?
Absolutely. That's part of the enlightenment process, right? We're lightening, we're releasing that burden that's been holding us down all those years. But we don't realize it until we start doing the work. And then we can feel the difference. I'm encountering a lot of people these days who've not done any work and they don't believe that it changes. You've got to actually do some work and then you've got a perspective to see from. But at this point, so right now, at some point while I was doing that, laying on the sofa, feeling those past collective traumas, I realized I could keep my awareness inside my body after things had released, after the emotions had released. I could keep my awareness inside of me. So then I started working at a deeper level. So at this point, I can release tension in my bones, in my tooth roots, in my skull. And this is really releasing the burden. I mean, the forces inside of us that we are not aware of, right? It's all stored in our subconscious mind. All those memories, all that tension is stored as tension inside of us. And once we become aware of it, it's wild to realize how much is actually stored inside. But as I've been releasing more and more tension in my skull and my neck and down into my torso, I have decompressed 3/4 of an inch in my 50s. So I'm actually taller than I have ever been in my life before, which is the burden. That is the releasing of the burden in the physical body.
Wow. That is so powerful. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is incredible. And I mean, we've heard that these narratives are starting to be talked about more. I mean, The Body Keeps the Score is a very popular book that's out there, or at least starting to pay attention to that and starting to, at least acknowledge the connection. But that is so powerful. How freeing that is. And to know you've got that tool and that mindfulness and awareness is so empowering. Thank you for sharing that. That's incredible. How we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. You got to a point where you transformed from that woman in, with those two moms who was still hadn't processed through and was feeling probably very vulnerable and not very strong, to the person you are now. So I would say you are now through this living unapologetically. You've got this tool. You're now sharing it with others. Would you say that kind of describes that? And was there anyone else that came into you had to mention the holistic practitioner. Has there been anyone else that's kind of supported you through this, that you felt like you really got that unapologetic support, partnership, collection, community?
Well, it's been a journey and there've been people along the way, I think they normally are. But as I got deeper and deeper, I was always searching for someone else who was doing this, who was able to do this.
Yeah.
And I've not actually found anyone that can actually do what I can do inside the body itself. So it's really an interesting process. And it is kind of empowering. When I started this journey, I was a very fearful mother. And I also had that posture of someone who is very fearful, right? And as you release the burden, as you release the past, the posture actually changes to someone who is more self-confident. So it's all connected. We hear that all the time, but it's absolutely all connected. So I'm still in search of people who know more or able to lead me further. Carl Jung has very similar concepts. In some regards, I'm finding they're absolutely 180 degrees opposite than the way I talk of things. But
sure,
it's that finding that shadow, it's releasing it and working through things from the past. And I also find, that I look for, I'm not religious at all, but I will look to see what did Jesus say? How can I interpret that through my experience? And so those are the kind of people I'm looking for these days. It's an interesting place to be, from being someone who did not know anything, had no self-awareness, was searching all these other teachers for help. And I did actually, Abraham Hicks is someone who helped at the beginning. She would say things like, when you wake up first thing in the morning and your mind is quiet and you feel good, it's like, nope. I never experienced that in my life.
Right.
I felt awful when I woke up. Yeah, right.
What is that look like?
Yeah, but I experienced that, partway through the journey. And that's when I realized I've never experienced a quiet mind in my life before. This was very strange to experience that. And that's when I realized that those phrases that I used to say, those self-judgmental, self-critical, and critical of other people as well.
Sure.
They were my dad's phrases that I had taken on in childhood, and I would use them against myself. But I couldn't see that until they had gone and they were no longer there. And then I could look back and say, okay, that's what it was.
Isn't that amazing when you're able to make that connection? I mean, you're at a whole other level than I've been able to get to. But your ability to really be so mindful, so aware, so open, because you have to be open to it. And I think as you have more kind of releases and more feelings of freedom, then that continues to open. But you also, it sounds like you've transitioned to this place of trusting yourself and trusting your body and trusting your intuition. So talk to me about that. And because I feel like that person you talked about earlier wasn't there. And as you have these things, have these experiences, you can't help it. Like, wait a minute, I can listen to my body. It is giving me clues. I just need to pay attention to them and trust myself, that I can move through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely been a journey of realizing that I was on a path and realizing that this is my path. And I remember telling my husband one day, I'm on a path. Don't stop me.
Don't get in my way.
Right. But one thing that really helped early on is, I think it was the day that I went to that doctor and I came home and I researched EFT. I wanted to know that it wasn't just a fluke, right? That there was more to it. I was really glad when I found out the person who developed it, Gary Craig, he used to be an engineer because I used to be a software engineer. He used to be a chemical engineer.
Okay.
So there's probably more to this. Yes. Yeah. But I wanted to try it out on something else. So I had a 17-year-old cat at home at the time, and his kidneys were starting to fail. And I was told I had to give him a daily saline shot. So an injection, a saline solution. And I hated needles. So the first time I gave him this shot, my hand was shaking so badly. I was so afraid of giving him this shot. Yeah. So I thought, okay, let me try out this technique. Right. So I tapped about it, and I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting my cat. And I tapped about all the injections I had had over the years because I'd lived around the world. We had many. And the next day, when I gave him that shot, the needle slid right in. All that fear that had been living inside of me the day before had totally disappeared. Wow. So that's when I realized how powerful EFT was. But I also realized all those memories, all those emotions that live inside of us, they're just energy. And if we can get to the other side, that's where the freedom is. And it was such a simple example for me, but I realized, okay, if that can happen with that one simple thing, this is what I'm going to do. I want that freedom. I want those emotions out of my body. So that really spurred me on to keep going and to do that work.
Wow. That's so powerful. We should get a taste of that freedom. It's like, okay, what is possible with this? That's amazing. That's incredible. That's a powerful example. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. And the importance of setting and coming back to your why and your values in everything you do. I mean, you used examples earlier of what spurred you on to do this work, and now you are offering out to others. So talk to me about your why behind that, and when you got to a point of like, I need to let other people know that this is happening and this is possible.
Well, I had never heard of anybody being able to put their awareness inside their body and shift their bones before. So when I got to that point, I thought, okay, I need to write it down.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I don't want to forget all the intricacies of the story, of the journey. So I wanted to write it down so other people could see that this is possible too, because I just didn't know it was possible.
Right.
Yeah, now I do. Now I know it's possible, and I know the steps that I took. And to kind of explain it, I have that engineering mind as well. So I thought, maybe it'd be good to write it down and try and explain it in a way that hopefully other people would understand it. Yeah. So that's why I did that. It always comes back to us on many layers. We hear that. So, we don't want to use that term selfishness, but that's all part of the journey. So if I don't want to share it, then there's a barrier inside of me. And I can find that barrier and I can release it so it becomes easy to share it. So part of the reason I share it is because it's fun. It's fun to have these deep conversations with other people. It's fun to explain this kind of thing. So that's part of it. If it wasn't fun, I wouldn't be doing it. Or I would look at that not funness. Yeah. That would be a barrier. And I would find it. Yes. Wow. So another part of that, the answer to that question, kind of more with the inner work, is I really wanted to understand the law of attraction. We hear it all the time. We hear all about it. And I realized it's more than just our thoughts. It's not just our thoughts. It's everything about us. It's part of our signal that we're emitting. Mm-hmm. So once I really realized and understood that, I would ask myself during the day, how am I feeling right now? And do I want to feel this way again in the future? And most of the time, when I asked myself that question, obviously I was asking it because I was not feeling great.
Right.
I would realize,
that's an easy answer.
Yes. So when I realized that I'm emitting a signal every second of every day, and I'm going to attract back based on that signal, I would realize, okay, if I'm feeling yucky right now, I don't want to attract this back. So I would do the work right then. I would tap, allow whatever I was feeling to be acknowledged, accepted, and to allow it to release so that my signal then is nice. It's peaceful. And that's what I'm going to attract back. So in terms of, day to day, that was my why. That was my how, my why. I asked myself that question.
Yeah, because it changes what you attract, and also just within relationships and the kinds of people and the kinds of activity, all those things, because we do carry an aura about us, an energy about us, and it's odd, and it's very obvious, and it's very empowering to know that there's something I can tap into that, literally, no pun intended, and I have a tool here that I know can help me show up the way I want to show up in the world and attract the kind of, energy and just kind of experiences, that you have a say in that. Thank you for that. That's really, that was
we
really
can
good.
Always bring it back to ourselves. Like a lot of times with relationships, it's like we're frustrated with someone else, or we don't like what someone else did, and we think it's them. Our part of that equation is how we feel about that. So if we're frustrated, that's our frustration. If we don't like what they did, there's still some feeling inside of us of not liking what they did, and we can work with that and release that. Then we're emitting a different signal, and we're going to attract something different back from them. So maybe we were frustrated with them. And as we release that frustration, we're actually allowing them to be who they are.
Right.
And we don't have to get frustrated with it.
Right.
And it changes.
Because we don't have control over it anyway. We can't change it anyway. But
Absolutely.
We don't have to be held hostage by that. This is an interesting one. Living out of your own expectations versus others' expectations. You went after this tool and the power within it. And I'm sure there's been a lot of like interesting, because people are just judgy and make assumptions, about expectations about you with this versus what you would do with it, what it means. Talk to me about, and even just as younger, I mean, you had some very traumatic experiences. So talk to me about your expectations journey and just getting comfortable living out of your own expectations versus others' expectations.
Yeah, I used to be energetically pulled and pushed by everyone around me.
Yeah.
And that's what those expectations are. If you don't understand it or know what's happening, you do get pulled and pushed around by others. And
yes.
I think a lot of empaths, that's kind of the empathetic way. But we don't realize we can do something about it, which is what we just discussed, right? If we notice that there's an expectation, then there's a pull, that we're feeling pulled. Our part of that is we're feeling pulled by them. So we can work on that feeling of being pulled. Right?
Yes.
So we can always bring it back to us. And as we release that, again, our signal changes. So those expectations, if that other person has that expectation, they might pull that expectation from someone else. Mm-hmm. Something will shift. So we don't experience that until we do the work, until we realize, that something's going to shift if I work on this myself. Wow. So yes, that's definitely been a journey over the years, and it changes family dynamics for the better.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, honey. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh yeah. Very, very true. Thank you for that. That's so true. You've talked about layers already, but talk to me about accepting the layered aspects of yourself. Because sometimes, well, not sometimes, when we're pulling back these layers, sometimes it's stuff that's like, ooh, what do I do with, or how do I feel about that? So talk to me about accepting those layers. Because I know it's been a journey for me of like, I don't have to like everything that happened, but it is a part of my journey. It is something that needs to be acknowledged and worked through. And it doesn't take away from the value of who I am and how I show up in the world. But some things can be harder to accept and work through than others. So talk to me about your layers journey as you started peeling these things back.
Yeah. That is a whole journey. And we do have many, many layers. We have many, many layers with each aspect of ourselves. Mm-hmm. So, we can be aware of different aspects and we can work through a layer at a time, keeping in mind, knowing that it's just energy that's stuck inside of us, right? So depending on how intense the layer is, I would use these different tools. So if I really get triggered by something, even this day, I will tap, because I've got too many emotional barriers to feel those sensations inside. But if it's something that's not as intense, if I can just sit with that feeling, then I will do that. But you're right. I mean, that there's so many things I think these days that are coming up, even in collective society, right?
Yes.
Deep things, deep emotions for us to work on and release. So early on in this journey, I stopped watching the news. I wouldn't do that because I had so much of my own stuff to deal with, all those layers.
Adding to it.
Right. But as time has gone by and I've worked on my own stuff, I will now listen to the news, watch the news, because I want to heal at a deeper level. So I will notice where I'm still triggered and I will work on those layers. So
wow.
The layers are just so amazing. I hope there is an end to the journey. And sometimes we think there should be, right? We think, well, okay,
right.
What's all my
and we get on this path. Yeah, I'm going to do this for 6 months and I'm going to be better and it's all going to be good. And
Right.
It's not how
and things do change, right? But we become aware at a deeper level.
Exactly.
So a deeper level, a deeper layer will come up to be healed.
Right.
And it's just a deeper and deeper level of healing. So now I'm working on the tension I can feel in my palate, right, in my bones.
Yeah.
And that was a layer that I never expected I would get to.
Yeah.
Didn't know you could, right? So it's still a deeper level, a deeper layer.
Yeah.
And at some point, hopefully, it will all release. But I have no idea at this point whether it still will.
Yeah. And in the world we live in, it's very difficult to every time you get through one thing, another thing comes up. But you still have that power of knowing how to approach those things. And I like what you said earlier. I think we have that recognizing, instead of seeing things as positive or negative, seeing that that's an energy that is moved through, that I can move through. And when you're able to take that, we call it, I guess, a more neutral stance, it releases the judgment that we put on ourselves and the critiquing and the shaming and all those things that we do to ourselves, because you talked about, the negative self-talk earlier and adopting things that you heard growing up from your father. I have some of those same experiences too. But when you're able to take that more neutral approach, it removes all of that, negative energy or as you respond to yourself. And just allowing that, it's like, okay, this is another revolution. This is another, a revealing of, and now I have a tool and I can move through it. And this happened. And it just makes, I think, the whole acknowledging, when you take that, I just love that stance that you talked about with it, because I think it just releases so much pressure and just how we approach ourselves.
Wanted to add something to what we just talked about, because I know some people can hear that, there's layer upon layer upon layer, and think, okay, it's too much of a journey. I'm not going to start it because it's never going to end. But as we talked about earlier, there's an enlightenment process. We start to feel lighter. The journey actually becomes fun, becomes more of a game, right? Because I'm looking to see what the next layer is.
Yes, the curiosity. Instead of fear, you move into a place of curiosity.
Right. But also, right, our body is freeing up. That burden is releasing. Life becomes more fun. It becomes easier to laugh. It becomes more peaceful during the day. We're not as reactionary, right? We don't get triggered the way we used to. So it's a really fun journey and absolutely worth starting.
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that. I 1,000% agree. It's so much better. I mean, the person I am today, and my work has been different from yours, but I understand this from the layers standpoint and how I've been able to heal layers through my work. And I think yours has even more power. It is freeing. It is freeing to be comfortable in your own skin and to know you've got tools, because you're going to have bad days and things are going to come up, but you've got the tools to I understand what that is. I know where that's coming from. Let's walk that out. And you're not stuck. You're not beating yourself up. You're not taken out by it. I mean, it's just so it's worth it. You got to be willing to sit in it and move through it. But I promise you, along with Anne, it is worth it. You are worth it. I mean, I think that's where we have to really get okay with the fact that you are innately valuable and you are worth being able to live this way. In summary, in Living Out Feel, finding empowerment, embracing layers, which is what you've done. It's exactly what you've done. Talk to me about how this has affected your relationship with yourself, which we talked a little bit about already, as well as your relationship with others. And kind of in summary, we've touched on that, but kind of bring that home for us.
Well, it absolutely changes it from not trusting myself. I mean, I did not trust myself. I was always looking outside of myself for other people's opinions and for other people's decisions. I can't say the decision thing has totally changed yet. I still don't particularly like making decisions, but I can trust myself, and I will take responsibility for things that I would not have in the past.
Right.
Because what we talked about is okay, my part of this is how I feel. So I can always take that responsibility. And I could not do that before. I could not look inside I had too much resistance to looking inside before. So yeah, it changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That resistance piece is tough. I mean, it's a wall that gets in your way that you got to break down to get to the stuff. I mean, that is so, so powerful. So true. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Okay. The biggest one is probably deep conversations. I love to meet people at this depth because I can't with my family, right? My family's not where I am. So
sure.
Yeah. Deep conversations are very satisfying. Time alone. I'm still an introvert. I would say I'm comfortable not being, but time alone is when I do my release work most intently. I can do it when I'm doing other things around other people, but I just love that time alone.
Yeah.
Delicious food. I'm sorry, my senses have changed over the time, right? So they're more intense, right? So I can taste things more intently than I could before, and I love good tasting food. But not only taste, I mean, my senses, I can hear not just through my ears, but I can feel sound vibrations throughout my body. That was something that I didn't have before because I had so many barriers.
You've got the capacity for it now. You've got the room and the space to have that experience.
Right. Yes. So all of those senses. And I have dogs. I know you have animals too. And I love cuddling and walking my dogs. So I'm counting those as 2.
That's awesome. That's so good. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Okay, well, my goal was always inner peace. That's what I was looking for when I started this journey. So even more peace, I would be nice. More awareness. I know it comes with this journey, but I'm pretty sure I will even have more awareness in the next 6 months. Yeah. Light. Feeling this feeling of lightness. I love it. Yeah. And so more light would be nice. Satisfied. Love to feel satisfied. Yes. And challenged, which I know comes along with this process. I'm actually going to New Zealand soon, and we're going to do a zip lining up in the top of the trees. So I'm going to challenge my fear of heights. I'm going to feel it, sit in that fear, and allow it to dissipate. So, yeah.
Good for you. Oh my gosh. And you get to go to New Zealand. So that sounds in itself amazing. There's the reward for doing that. But Anne, thank you so much. This was such an enlightening conversation. So powerful. These tools that you have that you've learned about and now that you're sharing, I'm so thankful for. Audience, embracinglayers.com. Go to that sources page. You're going to find Anne's information. But Anne, real quick, for people that want to hear it in the moment, they're don't want to take the time to go to the website. Talk to us about where people can find you, follow you, get these resources and help from you.
Okay, well, I have a YouTube channel and it has an EFT demonstration video on there and a video about what words to use with EFT. So try there first. I'm very active on Facebook, so you can find me there. And my website is annehince.com. The x-rays are there, so you can see how I've shifted my skull bones and see how powerful.
It's crazy, people. Like I've watched it. I previewed all this stuff as Anne introduced herself to me to kind of look at what it was all about. It is amazing. So even if you're not sure, look at that. It's powerful. It's like, oh, wow, this is amazing.
Thank you. I also have my book, A Pathway to Insight, which is the description of these steps, and a workbook that I put out that will help you dig up all your past so that you can work through it.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for that. Again, that'll all be on our sources page, guys. So don't worry. You can go to that. And thank you for your time today, for sharing your journey. Again, like I said earlier, so powerful, so enlightening, and so really cool, really victorious to see somebody find this and this empowerment that you've gained and that is possible for us is really encouraging. So thank you so much
Thank you. Thank you for the deep conversation, satisfying conversation, right?
Absolutely. I'm glad I don't know if I can keep up with you, but I'm glad I can contribute to that today. Field Podcast audience, be encouraged by this. Know that you don't have to carry the heavy load. There's ways, there's tools, there's possibilities in moving through these things. Your body is not your enemy. Your emotions are not against you. These are clues. Pay attention to them. Trust them, listen to them, and utilize these tools that are available to live in a freeing, empowering way that you were meant to. And we hope you find this encouraging and helpful this week. Share it with others. If you feel like I'm in a good space, I found tools that work for me, but you think it might be helpful to somebody else, share that. Let's let women know this is possible for them. And there's a way to live that feels this way. So thanks so much to everybody for being with us today. Thank you again to Anne, and have a great week.